Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Wi-Fi 6, Separating the Magic from the Myth, sponsored by Plume. Before we begin, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. On the bottom of your screen is the Q&A. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can type your question into the Q&A box and submit them to our speakers. All questions will be saved, so if we don't get to answer you, we may follow up via email. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any technical difficulties, please click on the yellow Help widget. Here you can find answers to common questions. A copy of today's slide deck is available for download in the green Resource List widget. Towards the end of today's presentation, we'll ask you for your feedback. A survey will pop open on your screen and will only take 1 minute to complete. Your feedback is extremely helpful. An on-demand version of the webcast will be available about 1 day after the event and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier today. I would now like to turn the event over to Light Reading's Cable and Video Practice Leader, Alan Bresnick. Alan?
Thank you, Beth. Good day, everyone. Welcome to our latest Light Reading webinar today, which is entitled, as Beth said, Wi-Fi 6, Separating the Magic from the Myth. As Beth said, my name is Alan Bresnick. I'm the Cable Video Practice Leader at Light Reading and a contributing analyst at Heavy Reading, which is the research arm of Light Reading. Based outside Toronto, I specialize in the cable, video, and broadband technology markets. I put together this webinar in tandem with our exclusive sponsor, Plume, and my Omdia colleague, John Kendall. We have another thoughtful, forward-looking program for you today, focusing on the two latest Wi-Fi specs. In this session, we will seek to separate the magic of Wi-Fi 6 and 6E from the myth as we explore the opportunities two specs offer. We will examine the issues and challenges that the two specs raise and how to overcome them. And we will address what else broadband providers must do to optimize the smart home experience for their subscribers. Okay, so before we get started, just a reminder that the slides will advance automatically throughout the session. If you wish, you can download the slides by clicking on the Additional Resources button located below the presentation window. As always, we will have an audience question and answer session at the end of this webinar. You can take part in the Q&A session at any time. Just type your question into the Ask a Question area and then click the Submit button. We will also be conducting one audience poll today, so we'll keep things moving right along. And in that spirit, let's look at our speaker lineup today. After I set the context for today's session, I will turn the mic over to my Informatech colleague, John Kendall, who is a principal analyst at Omdia. He will join us from Austin, Texas in a little while. Then we will hear from Bill McFarland. Bill is CTO of Plume. He will join us from the Bay Area in California. Okay, now let's look at today's agenda. As usual, we have plenty to cover in this session. First, I'm going to do a little bit of a Wi-Fi 6 market overview to sort of set the context for the rest of the discussion. Then John will come on from Omdia and talk about the market impact of COVID-19 and what the ramifications of that are. Then Bill from Plume will come on and get into the real meat of the webinar, talking about realizing the power of Wi-Fi 6 and how to use what Wi-Fi 6 means, really get into the technology. Then we'll have a little discussion among the three of us, and we'll take your questions as well. We'll probably combine the panel discussion and the audience questions because we're expecting a lot of questions. We have a big audience today. Okay, so let's get into the benefits of Wi-Fi 6. Let me do all the animation here. I don't want to step too far. Let's take a step back. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so benefits of Wi-Fi 6, probably a lot of people know this already, but first of all, higher data rates, Wi-Fi 6 is up to 37% faster than Wi-Fi 5, the current Wi-Fi. Increased capacity, offers up to 4 times the throughput, thanks to MU-MIMO, multi-user MIMO. Improved coverage, 20 to 30% better coverage than Wi-Fi 5. Fourth, better performance in environments with many connected devices. In fact, Wi-Fi 6 is pretty much designed for environments with many connected devices. Improved power efficiency, and as you can see, 50%. Parks Associates has projected that the number of connected devices in the average household with 2 teenagers will be going up more than 50% by 2022. So Wi-Fi 6 is definitely designed for homes with many connected devices. Okay, so many Wi-Fi 6 consumer devices are now available. There's actually not that many yet, but a lot of more are coming this year. There's a big splash, as John mentioned to me earlier, there's a big splash of announcements about Wi-Fi 6 capable devices made at CES last year. And at CES this year, there were much more demonstrations. So there's going to be a lot more devices rolled out that are Wi-Fi 6 compatible this year. But as you can see here, the newest phones from Apple and Samsung and other devices already have Wi-Fi 6 capable. The lagging type of device are routers, but now we're starting to see some Wi-Fi 6 capable routers as well. So by the end of this year, there'll be hundreds and maybe thousands of Wi-Fi 6 consumer devices available. Partly as a result of that, and because the spec is getting rolled out around the world, Wi-Fi 6 is positioned to become dominant around the world. These are stats from IDC, which is another part of Informatech. As you can see here, Wi-Fi 6 will effectively replace Wi-Fi 5 by 2023, in the next 2 or 3 years. Wi-Fi 6 accounted for about 30% of sales in 2020, projected to account for about 60% of sales this year, 85% of sales in 2022, and 95%, virtually all sales by 2023, as this graph shows. Okay, my last chart, I got this from Luther Smith at Cable Labs. Cable Labs has been testing Wi-Fi 6 versus Wi-Fi 5. As you can see here, they've been finding both how much more effective and faster Wi-Fi 6 is, both in single-family homes and in multiple dwelling homes and apartment buildings. So you can see lots of reasons why Wi-Fi 6 is a happening thing right now. And now we'll get a little deeper into why Wi-Fi 6 is such a happening thing right now and get deeper into technology with the next two speakers. So that does it for me. So now let's bring in one of our two main speakers, John Kendall from Omdia, joining us from Austin, Texas. Good morning, John. Thanks for joining us today.
Good morning. How are you today, Alan?
Not too bad, thanks. Great to have you and Bill with us today.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. So I'd like to talk briefly about Wi-Fi 6 and the impact that COVID-19 has had on the home network. So what we've seen over the last year is that COVID-19 has radically redefined home broadband usage as people are working from home. They're learning from home. Of course, entertainment would be the typical broadband home experience, but that's also becoming increasingly more important over the past year. And we have also seen more professional services at home. The result of this has been that consumers are seeking, guaranteed, specially allocated bandwidth for their services. It's a shift from what the home network typically has been. And I'll get into that a bit more. So the consumer requirements for home broadband have changed. We're seeing more whole home usage. People are trying to use Wi-Fi in more places than ever before as they seek, a quiet place to have a work meeting or to exercise. And the result of this is that we've seen a more expansive coverage of Wi-Fi throughout the entire household. We also see increased concurrent usage. So entire households are now at home at the same time all day, as opposed to during just peak hours needing to be concurrently on. We have multiple video streams working at the same time as people are working from home. I'm obviously doing this webinar from home. My children learn from home. And traditionally, actually, I should say, Wi-Fi has not been optimized for this without some sort of additional management software. We've also seen some increased upstream. Home broadband typically in the past has had a large downstream bias as people are consuming over their broadband connection rather than contributing. But growth in video communications, working from home, increases that upstream traffic. So now upstream requires performance parity with downstream. We're also seeing increased performance sensitivity. So as consumers are now more dependent on home broadband than ever, performance has become a leading thought in the consumer mind. Latency is particularly disruptive under COVID. If your video calls are choppy, if you get blocky video over download or even on your upload speeds, it's become problematic in the consumer mind. So ISPs spent the last year responding to these challenges, but without optimal solutions. I mean, they're as nimble as they could be. So the first challenge would be, customers are requiring more bandwidth than ever before. So the initial response would be provide that increased bandwidth, eliminate any data caps for free just to satisfy customers. But the optimal solution really would be to improve monetization of the new bandwidth demand or find a way to lower the cost of providing that bandwidth. Another challenge is increased customer service calls. So we know that most customer service calls to an ISP have to do with Wi-Fi performance. Why is my Wi-Fi not working? By extension, that means why is my broadband, why is my internet not working? So the initial response would be to hire more call center staff to meet that increased demand. But the longer term optimal solution would be deploy better software in the home gateways, better CPE, more robust CPE in order to enable remote management, proactive troubleshooting to find problems before the customer even knows that there is a problem. A third challenge is a large increase in video streaming. The initial response, which started about last year at this time, as a matter of fact, streaming services reduced their bit rates, their video quality to limit data usage in order to focus on delivering the product itself without a lot of bandwidth congestion. But in the long term, service providers need to increase their network capacity or deploy smarter video delivery solutions, which includes better Wi-Fi in the home. So we see that all vendors will offer Wi-Fi 6 solutions in 2021. We saw, like Alan outlined, some announcements last year. There was a big push toward Wi-Fi 6. Wi-Fi 6 and 6E, the initial opportunity is a little bit small, as Alan was alluding to earlier, with the end devices not necessarily capable of accessing the Wi-Fi 6. But those that will be the higher margin devices, and that provides service providers access to the highest spending customers. And so vendors will want to be in the high spending homes. That's an opportunity to sell additional services, smart home devices, and also understand how these devices are being used in the home and understanding what the data ramifications of that is. Not having a Wi-Fi 6 product could be a big competitive disadvantage. Locks vendors out of a household's future spend on access points, and as customers start to realize that whole home Wi-Fi is more of a necessity than a luxury moving forward. Wi-Fi 6 does improve performance in congested home networks, as Alan was talking about earlier, through multi-user MIMO and OFDMA, which will be spoken about later by Bill. This will become more important to consumers in the end with ongoing COVID-19. We're more than a year into this, and we're still experiencing some COVID-19 situations. So we're still in a high level of concurrent home network usage. And I think the paradigm will be shifting as well, moving to the future. Like I said, those expectations of what the home network is and is capable of have shifted permanently. We do see that Wi-Fi 6 will be the dominant standard beyond 2021. Vendors will need to offer diverse product ranges, routers, gateways, whole home systems, and this will meet the individual needs of as many households as possible. 2021 also presents a great opportunity for service providers to recover ground lost to retail. So consumers, at the initial outbreak of COVID, when everybody started working out of their homes, consumers turned to retail products for improved Wi-Fi rather than service provider solutions, because the retail options were available and service providers were a bit paralyzed by supply chain issues initially. But service providers in 2021 will focus on providing customers with a better Wi-Fi experience, with better gateways, with better Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi 6, whole home Wi-Fi systems by either providing a solution or partnering with a third party. and more integrated software solutions in order to route that traffic around the home. As the last mile has stopped being from the street to the wall of the house, it is now the actual Wi-Fi network within the home. And so service providers will deploy new generation of CPE that's capable of much more, offers a flexible platform, can address different property sizes and different circumstances. A most important element of this is the software to provide that consistent brand experience alongside apps for network management. And it's our position also that service providers are uniquely positioned to provide this equipment to their customers for a much lower upfront cost. They can tailor a rental model for their customers, or they can entice customers to higher bandwidth tiers in order to realize higher ARPU and then provide the customer with a consistent Wi-Fi experience. And Wi-Fi 6 will be a very important part of the strategy, but does need to be targeted where it's most useful in the higher end, where the customer is accessing large amounts of bandwidth and needs that routed carefully throughout their home. Retail vendors also need to maintain their technological advantage. They need to be able to stay ahead of what the service provider offerings are. The main threat here to service providers is that service providers can risk losing control of the home network if they don't launch their own technologically more advanced devices. So we'll see service providers in 2021 upgrading their own offerings to support Wi-Fi 6 in order to remain competitive with those solutions at retail. Because if a customer is shopping for a better Wi-Fi experience, either on an online retailer or at a commercial retail big box store, they're already halfway to churning. And so what we'll see is this push and pull of retail devices being more technologically advanced and service providers responding. And now more than ever, service providers realize that they need to be on par with the retail market in order to remain competitive and to enhance stickiness of their customers. So what we're seeing over the past year is this realization also that the current network provision and usage are largely dependent upon where you're accessing the network. So if you're at work, you have an enterprise network. Enterprise networks have SLA-backed service, higher bandwidth and reliability. That's to serve multiple concurrent users, several concurrent users, it could be several hundred in some cases over Wi-Fi environments, and that is a guaranteed service. And then you have the home network, which traditionally have been best effort services, focused more on consumption and downstream rather than upstream and collaborative video conferencing type of applications. And then you have the mobile network. And mobile network usage is typically concentrated on telephone use, communications apps, texting, WhatsApp, these sorts of applications. Bandwidth intensive usage is limited by expense, depending on your mobile plan. You may have data caps. And everybody's experience is different on each of these three networks. Everybody's expectation is different on these three networks. Enterprise networks, very little patience for any sort of interference. On the home network, there's a little bit of patience. But if it's on your TV screen, it's not a lot of patience. And then on the mobile network, you have a lot more patience with your expectation of how content reaches the screen on your mobile phone. But post-COVID-19 society is going to require a holistic approach for networks. So instead of these three silos of enterprise, home network, and then the mobile network, we need to see a converged network experience. Consumer behavior has changed forever. People will work from home more than they did pre-COVID. There'll be more video conferencing use at home. There'll be more learning at home and more, working out and other professional services at home. And so network investments will need to provide flexible and efficient access in all locations for all applications. Consumer patience will decline for any kind of interference, and expectation of an app performance on a mobile device versus a laptop versus a television set will become inelastic, and expectation will be there for that to work and work properly. And the accelerated shift that we've seen for COVID-19 is a window into the future of how all customers perceive and use the network, not the home network, not the work network, not the mobile network, but the network itself is how people are starting to conceive of things. And so applications need to be served no matter the network or location with end-to-end application management, and that requires this converged network. So the post-COVID-19 home networks will serve all purposes, essentially. So you have a home gateway with robust software capable of prioritizing traffic, remote management, proactive troubleshooting, and solving network issues. This will ensure the quality of work and remote learning connection on a laptop, for instance. It will keep latency at levels sufficient for gaming on consoles and on PCs. It'll provide high-quality video streaming for HD 4K content. It also offers a platform for additional services and additional revenue opportunities for service providers, such as home security or smart home. It also gives trainers and other professionals access dedicated bandwidth for services. So if you are, say, a remote home trainer, you need to make sure that your upload speed is working properly as well. And it also offers whole home Wi-Fi access points for reaching all areas of the home, including maybe even the back garden and the backyard. And all this together results in fewer customer service calls and truck rolls, and that considerably reduces costs for service providers. So what we see is that we'll need long-term solutions after a short-term crisis. So we'll need to lower the cost of bandwidth delivery on the service provider side, or find new revenue streams with guaranteed service quality. In the center here, I put it in the center because it is the central pillar, but software will manage the home network better and enable that proactive troubleshooting and management to eliminate those customer service calls. And also to better serve increased video demand, service providers need to increase network capacity or deploy smart delivery solutions. So this converged network will require a fundamental evaluation of bandwidth delivery strategies in order to meet these new home network expectations. With that, I'll hand it back off to Alan.
Okay, thank you, John. That was excellent. Thanks for all the background and context. A quick question for you with the forecast that you made. What could go wrong? What do you worry about might screw up the optimistic forecast for Wi-Fi 6?
The main thing would be that consumers, the end devices, aren't filtering into the households quick enough.
Right.
However, the clever branding of Wi-Fi 6, I think, when you move away from sort of the engineering terminology of 802.11ax, people start to relate Wi-Fi 6 to a 5G sort of thing where it sounds simple, but 5 is one more than 4, therefore 5G must be better than 4G. Wi-Fi 6 is one more than Wi-Fi 5, therefore Wi-Fi 6 must be better. And because of that, consumers might not be looking necessarily to see if their laptop is capable of Wi-Fi 6 or if their their mobile device is capable of Wi-Fi 6.
Right.
But they just see a Wi-Fi 6 product and it's better.
Right.
So that didn't really answer what could go wrong, but
that's okay. I didn't prepare you for that. So
basically, in-device proliferation would be the main limitation, I think.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much. We'll get more into questions afterwards. Now I'd like to bring in our second main presenter, is Bill McFarland from Plume. Hi, Bill. Thanks for sponsoring and thanks for participating in the session. Welcome to the webinar.
Hey, Alan. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Take it away.
There's a lot of excitement about Wi-Fi 6. It's even kind of indicated by the number of attendees. I guess we have close to 400 attendees or maybe more at this point on this webinar. But it turns out that making good use of Wi-Fi 6 is trickier than it looks. And so I'm going to talk about the features and capabilities of Wi-Fi 6, a little bit redundant with some of the material earlier. But what I'm really going to focus on is what's really required to make effective use of these new features and capabilities. Now, I think Alan already introduced me, but I should probably introduce Plume, the company that I work for, a little bit. Plume makes a cloud-based platform that enables service providers to rapidly deploy new services. These services include things like cybersecurity, parental controls, motion detection, which can be used for a security system or for like a wellness monitoring system. But most important for today's topic, we also are big in the area of Wi-Fi management. That's one of the services that we provide across this platform. And so what I'll be talking today is focused entirely on that one aspect of our business, which is how we can help manage Wi-Fi networks and get the best performance out of them. Now, this slide shows the features, the advantages of Wi-Fi 6 and the technical aspects that bring them. Already got a little bit of a heads up on this from Alan, but I'll walk through them quickly because the whole presentation kind of builds off of how these work. So, this higher data rate and higher speed capability, it comes primarily from the fact that Wi-Fi 6 devices can use 160 megahertz frequency channels. Those frequency channels are twice as wide as most earlier Wi-Fi devices provided, and that allows them to transmit data at about twice the speed. Another important feature is orthogonal frequency division multiple access, kind of quite a mouthful. OFDMA is usually referred to by its abbreviation. And that allows the delivery of small packets simultaneously to a large number of devices from the access point in a single transmission. A single packet can deliver the needs for all the clients in the home if those needs are kind of modest. There's a capability called network slicing, and network slicing is effectively the ability to reserve throughput in the network for high priority real-time traffic. And so it improves the reliability of audio and video. Previous generations of Wi-Fi included traffic prioritization, but you couldn't do really strict reservations to reserve the bandwidth that you need for those traffic flows. And then there's a feature called target wake time, frequently abbreviated as TWT. So this is a power saving feature. It's a little bit unusual the way it works. It saves power by reserving the airwaves for sleeping devices, which are periodically waking up to send and receive traffic. The key is that Wi-Fi has basically a listen before talk type protocol. If someone else is already transmitting, you have to wait for them to get finished. And these devices that are asleep trying to save battery power, when they wake up, there's a whole lot of other conversation going on at that time. They have to wait through all of that before they get to do their thing. And so by reserving that time and telling everyone else to be quiet because this device is going to wake up and try to serve its own needs very quickly, that allows them to save power. And then there's Wi-Fi 6E. The E stands for extended. And that makes use of the new 6 gigahertz spectrum that's been allocated in the US and other geographies. It provides more spectrum to avoid interference and use these wide channel bandwidths. So that's certainly very helpful and important. Now, these features work well out of the box. They did a good job designing them, but they work well in an ideal environment, really. An environment with just one AP and no interference, effectively a Wi-Fi vacuum. Or a few environments are actually a Wi-Fi vacuum. More realistic environments that Wi-Fi works in have, I've broken into 3 different scenarios of interference between access points. So on the left-hand side, you see that there can be interference from neighboring Wi-Fi systems into your Wi-Fi system in your home. In many cases, these neighboring Wi-Fi systems are not centrally managed, and each AP is making independent choices about how to operate. I think John mentioned the fact that Wi-Fi 6, as of right now, is taken off primarily by consumers going out and buying aftermarket gear at retail. And so that's certainly very confusing and makes for a not very well coordinated overall environment that you're operating in. Now, in the center, there are also environments such as apartment complexes that have multiple APs that interfere with each other, but these APs might all be part of the same centrally managed system. For example, a service provider might have a contract with an apartment complex, and effectively they get to supply all of the Wi-Fi inside of that apartment complex, along with the broadband access. And in that case, they can make use of a centrally managed system, such as Plume's system, to manage all the APs from the cloud. So this represents kind of like in-system interference. Yes, the apartments are still interfering with each other, but because they're part of the same managed system, you can maybe do a few more things about it. And then finally, on the right-hand side of this diagram, you have interference that happens even within a single home. And one of the big trends these days is for homes to have multiple APs in them to ensure coverage and high data rates. One of the things that John mentioned is that with COVID, people are working from home. They're all scrambling around to the far corners of the house to find, some quiet and some peace of mind somehow in the environment. And that does put a strain on networks, and people are going out and getting repeaters and multiple access points into their homes in order to make sure that they cover the entire home at really good high data rates. And of course, a given access point, let's say, or a given network can be experiencing all three of these types of interference at the same time: foreign interference, in-system interference, and self-congestion. So to make Wi-Fi 6 and 6E work well in real environments, centralized, intelligent management is required. It's kind of counterintuitive. Wi-Fi 6 being more advanced, you think, oh, this is going to really take care of itself. Actually, the opposite is true. It actually requires more management than previous generations of Wi-Fi, not less. And the management that's required can be broken into 4 categories, and I'll talk about each of these categories in turn. The first is band management. The second is channel management. The third is steering management. And the fourth is time management. So talking about band management, to demonstrate this, there's a scenario that I've put in place here, and I'll just kind of walk through what this scenario is. You're going to have to imagine that this is happening in somebody's home. Imagine you have a tri-band AP, an AP in which 2 of the radios have a 2x2 MIMO capability. In other words, they go 2x kind of the baseline speed. And one of the radios has a 4x4 MIMO capability. It can go 4x the baseline speed. So a common hardware arrangement would be one 2x2 radio in the 2.4 gigahertz band to serve all the legacy clients that might even be 2.4 gigahertz only. And that I've represented by calling it channel 6. The other 2x2 radio might be in the lower half of the 5 gigahertz band. We can call that channel 42. And the third 4x4 radio, the really powerful good radio, is kind of tunable between the upper half of the 5 gigahertz band. I'm calling that channel 155. And the 6 gigahertz band, which I've made up the number channel 615 to help remind people that it's in channel 6, in the 6 gigahertz band. Now, the first network topology that one might arrange, and this is a multi-AP network topology with 2 APs kind of in series in the home and a bunch of clients connected to each one. In that first network topology, the network's arranged much as it would if it were a Wi-Fi 5 network, a previous generation Wi-Fi network. The backhaul is in the 5 gigahertz band using the 4x4 radio. And in some systems, such as Plume's, that radio can also be used for Wi-Fi clients to attach to. So that radio and that channel is open for Wi-Fi clients to attach on as well. Now, this allows devices with strong Wi-Fi capability, such as a MacBook or a MacBook Pro with its 3x3 MIMO radio, to connect at full speed. So you look at this topology and you think, okay, now Wi-Fi 6 is coming. We can definitely make this better. What we'll do is we'll put the backhaul connection into the 6 gigahertz band. And so then that topology would look like this. Now, it is true that by putting the backhaul into the 6 gigahertz band, you've made the backhaul completely awesome. So that backhaul will now have probably almost no interference because nobody else around you is using the 6 gigahertz band. And it's got a lot of bandwidth there. So you're going to be able to use 160 megahertz wide channel and go at that double speed rate. So the backhaul is going to be really awesome. But if you look at it, the connection to the client has actually been degraded. Assume the client is like the client I have here on my desktop right now. It's a 5 gigahertz capable client, doesn't have 6 gigahertz in it, has that strong 3x3 radio. It could go really fast. But the only option it has left is the 2x2 radio that's on the access point. It's actually going to downgrade the speed of the client. So we've improved the speed of the backhaul, but we've downgraded the speed of the client. So the question becomes simply, which of these is better, you know? And actually, turns out, as I say, I'm not smart enough to make that decision. I don't know, right? This depends on the condition in that exact home. How much traffic is flowing across the backhaul? How much interference is there on the different frequency channels? What kinds of clients are in the home? Are they clients that have these powerful radios, or are they clients that have a more modest radio capability? All of that needs to be taken into account in order to determine which of these configurations is actually the best one. And so that's a problem that needs to be solved by using really intelligent network management and doing a rigorous optimization of each network individually in order to choose the topology that's really going to serve that home best. Now, along with choosing which band each radio should operate in, we want to make intelligent selection of the frequency channel within those frequency bands. And this has always been a challenge for Wi-Fi systems before. They have to choose what frequency channel to operate on. But Wi-Fi 6 brings two additional complications. The first is that Wi-Fi 6 devices generally include the ability to operate in 160 megahertz wide channels. We've been talking about that. But while this can double the speed, in many geographies like the US and Europe, there are only 260 megahertz channels available in the 5 gigahertz band. So networks that use 160 megahertz channels are very vulnerable to interference, right? Your neighbor is either in your own channel or the only other one left, and if there's a second neighbor, that's it, you're done. You have to be sharing a channel with one of your neighbors. So that makes for a more complicated decision-making process about what to do. When should 160 megahertz be used? Which homes really deserve it? Using 160 megahertz throws interference out into those neighboring homes. If you're running the whole MDU apartment complex Wi-Fi system, do you really want to be putting one of those units on 160 megahertz and polluting all of the surrounding neighbors around it and so forth? So it's complicated. There's a lot of decisions that need to be made, a lot of choices that need to be made. Now, Wi-Fi 6 also includes a tool to help with this called BSS Color, and that helps with managing interference from overlapping networks. But of course, that makes for more complicated decisions. The way it works is kind of illustrated in this diagram. The diagram shows a theoretical arrangement of homes with 4 different frequency channels. In this case, I used a very simple frequency channel numbering scheme, just 1, 2, 3, 4, and a variety of these colors. The colors allow an AP to transmit even when a signal is present on the same frequency channel, if it is coming from a different color. The notion is that as long as the transmission is from a different network, not your own home, and that network is sufficiently far away, signals coming from it are actually pretty weak, then both networks can transmit at the same time without interfering with each other. It's like being in a room having a conversation. If there's somebody standing right next to you having a really loud conversation, you probably can't converse with your partner. But if they're at the far end of the room, even though you're hearing them a little bit, you can probably still hold a perfectly good, normal conversation with the person who's next to you. It's that same kind of concept here. So both networks can transmit at the same time without interfering with each other. This can be effective, or it can create additional collisions and chaos, right? What if you make the wrong decision? What if, in practice, these networks are close enough together that they really will interfere with each other? Then nobody will be able to hear everything. It'll be worse than just being really polite and letting the other person finish what they're saying. So the system needs to make a number of correct decisions again. We need to decide, which AP which gets which channel, which color, and what receives signal strength. Should you transmit on top of another transmission? This all has to be planned out. And as you can see, it's not being planned out within a single home. It's being planned out across an entire network of access points and so forth. So Wi-Fi 6 brings these 160 megahertz channels, BSS Color, both of which require rigorous, intelligent optimization to ensure that consumers benefit from these advances rather from actually suffering from them. OFDMA is kind of the marquee feature of Wi-Fi 6 when people think about what's really new and different with Wi-Fi 6 from before. It's this OFDMA capability. It promises to allow tremendous growth in the number of Wi-Fi IoT devices without overly congesting networks. These are devices, as shown on this slide, that are kind of the kinds of devices that need just a small amount of traffic, but you might end up having lots of them, 30, 50, 100 of them eventually in your home. And if you have to send a separate individual packet to each one of these devices to service their needs, there's a tremendous amount of overhead and wasted airtime, and the actual capacity of the network goes down rapidly. You can really chew up a lot of capacity on a Wi-Fi network, sending lots of little tiny packets. So the key is that by combining what would have been many transmissions into a single packet that services all these guys right at once, a large amount of this wasted airtime is saved. However, more and more homes are getting multiple access points to ensure good coverage and high data rates throughout the home. The presence of these multiple APs can make it difficult for OFDMA to do its job. Imagine the scenario shown here on the left. You've got a home with 8 IoT devices and 4 APs. If the IoT devices were distributed among all the APs, there might be only 2 devices per AP. So each AP can only aggregate 2 devices into their OFDMA transmissions. So that's going to limit the actual improvement you get from OFDMA. Now, you can imagine a potential fix for this would be to say, okay, I'm going to be clever, I'm going to be smart about this. I'm only going to allow one of the access points in the home to service OFDMA traffic. Now, all of those clients, we can push them, we can client steer them and shove all those OFDMA appropriate clients onto that one access point. But the problem with this approach is that some devices might be too far from that AP, requiring transmission at a very low data rate. And once again, that will destroy the efficiency improvements that we're still trying to get. So like the story of Goldilocks and the 3 bears, I like to say, there is kind of a just right solution for this home. Now, the tricky thing is that it's different for each and every home. So this solution balances the desire to aggregate a large number of OFDMA-capable devices onto a single AP so we can really make efficient use of that OFDMA technology. But you have to balance that with not trying to get devices to connect to an access point that's way too far away and having to go at a really low data rate. So again, an intelligent system that optimizes the network is required to get the advantage of Wi-Fi 6 in real environments. Now, Wi-Fi 6 brings 2 features that try to manage airtime for advantage. Remember, I talked about time management. So now we're going to talk about time management. There's the target wake time, or TWT feature, that I described at the beginning. This is this thing where, you let devices that are waking up from being asleep, you reserve the airtime so that they can transmit right away and receive right away and get back to sleep quickly. And then there's also a technique called network slicing, which reserves time and frequency slots for high priority traffic. So I'm going to talk about both of these, and I'm going to talk about them separately. Now, as with the other features, I will warn you up front, you can tell the theme of the presentation, that making these work effectively in a multi-AP environment is tricky. So this is the TWT scenario. Consider a home with several APs and clients. AP1 might reserve a TWT slot for phone P1 to wake up and transmit. However, AP2 in the home might also be reserving TWT slots for one of the phones connected to it. We call that phone P2. And they might reserve actually the same time. Now, that's not going to be very effective because the 2 awakening phones, which might actually be fairly close to each other, will interfere with each other during their TWT slots. Either one will have to wait for the other, or they'll both try to go at the same time and collide, and neither of them will have successful transmissions. This isn't going to save power. So the right thing to do is a bit complicated. For P1, it's important that AP2 reserve that TWT slot, even though none of its clients will use it. So AP2 doesn't have P1 connected to it, but that TWT slot reserved for P1, it's got to reserve it among all of its clients so they don't interfere with that phone when it wakes up and tries to transmit. On the other hand, AP3, way on the right-hand side, that may be far enough away that it doesn't need to reserve the slot. Finally, the TWT slots at AP2, would need to be reserved for both AP1 and AP3 because it's in the middle. It's kind of sandwiched in there, right? So when it reserves time slots for its clients, it's got to reserve them on both of the other two APs in the home. And so you can imagine the possible scenarios are nearly infinite. So that's kind of complicated. And it's pretty much a similar scenario for network slicing. In this diagram, the red segments are high priority, in this case, video traffic that I'm trying to get through the network. The green stuff is, best effort traffic. I'm receiving emails that have come in or whatever else. And that you might kind of jumble all together and let it just compete in the normal way that Wi-Fi does to get throughput through. That's actually an efficient thing for that type of traffic. Now, one of the key things you need to keep in mind for this kind of a topology in this kind of scenario is that some of the video traffic might have to go through multiple hops in the home to reach its eventual destination. And if you want that to be a really reliable stream and to make use of this new network slicing capability, you have to reserve those transmissions all the way through the home, all the way through the multiple APs. And so again, it's kind of a complicated scheduling solution that needs to be done. Now, the problems that I showed here were specifically drawn out in a multi-AP home as the example, but similar scenarios can exist in single AP homes that have interference from neighbors or that have interference from other units within an apartment complex, within an MDU. So coordination across multiple APs at homes is, again, particularly beneficial for Wi-Fi 6. So, I don't want to downplay Wi-Fi 6 too much, right? This is a huge improvement, and it's a great thing to have. And you're probably thinking, okay, how can I get this glorious system? The best system would be to have Wi-Fi 6 and this central management and so forth. How do I get this? It turns out that there is kind of a convenient way to do it. So there is an industry-wide open source effort. It's called OpenSync. You can find out more about it at a website called opensync.io. And it's an open source software agent that can be put on an access point, which enables that access point to be monitored and controlled by the cloud. So you can take any access point, you add this software agent onto it, and now it's got all the hooks and features and capabilities that you need to be able to access that from a cloud management system, collect statistics from it, control activities that are going on, and so forth. So it can turn any access point into a cloud-managed access point by loading this open source software onto it. And it also brings other capabilities as well. OpenSync includes a software-defined networking capability, an SDN, which allows it not only to manage Wi-Fi, but it allows you to implement other services such as cybersecurity, parental controls, and even Wi-Fi motion detection on this access point if you go ahead and get OpenSync and put it onto that access point. And this is even more convenient in a certain sense in that OpenSync has become quite popular. And so it's been supported by all the major chipset manufacturers. It comes pre-integrated in APs from a wide range of vendors and has been adopted by leading service providers, large and small. And the big enhancement now is that now it supports Wi-Fi 6. So if you go out and get this OpenSync thing, put it on your access points or get access points with it on there, then you have Wi-Fi 6 capability that comes with it. Okay, so dashing to the finish line here. So Wi-Fi 6, it's a major step forward for the industry, and you really want to, be supporting that. However, contrary to intuition, Wi-Fi 6 requires more sophisticated management than previous Wi-Fi generations. By using open source software and cloud-based management, service providers can ensure their customers get the most out of Wi-Fi 6. Thanks.
All right. Very good, Bill. Thanks very much for delving so deep into technology and explaining it all. That was great. I think people really appreciate that technology primer. Okay, so that brings us to our first and only audience poll question of the day. Here's the question on your screens. The question is, which of the following factors most drives your interest in Wi-Fi 6? We give you six choices. Please choose two of them. First choice is high data rates in traditional single client device speed test. Second is high performance in environments with high interference or congestion. Third choice, consumer perception of Wi-Fi 6 as the best Wi-Fi offering. Fourth is desire to use the additional spectrum provided by the 6 gigahertz band. Fifth is superior support for large numbers of IoT devices in the home. Excuse me. And 6 is pressure from competitors, including retail, offering Wi-Fi 6. Now, it'll take the ON24 system a minute or so to compile all the results. So while waiting for them, I'll just do a quick question here with Bill. Bill, so just a follow-up on your presentation, do providers really need to upgrade all of their infrastructure for Wi-Fi 6, or can they do it on an incremental way and still realize the benefits of it?
So most of the features we talked about are end-to-end features, I'm afraid to say. Really, they only operate when Wi-Fi 6 is on both ends of the link. One exception might be PSS Color. They were pretty clever, and they figured out a way to kind of have PSS Color work to some extent with legacy devices. But one of the things that we do is, because of the way the system that we have is organized, we actually optimize these networks in a very rigorous way. We formulate the problem as what's called a mixed integer linear programming problem. And we actually optimize the networks. And so that if you have a mixed environment that has a mixture of Wi-Fi 5 devices and Wi-Fi 6 devices, it kind of automatically uses those in the end topology, the end configuration in the home, in the optimum way that it can. So that's, we do the best we can to use a mix and match. Certainly everything interoperates. Certainly everything works together. Clients that attach to a Wi-Fi 6 AP are going to get those features and those benefits. And so by planning out the best place that each client can go, the best way that each AP connects to other APs in the environment and so forth, we can get pretty effective use of a mixed set of equipment.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Thanks for providing that answer. Let's take a look at the poll results. And I went off video just because it's easier for me to read the screen and also to go into the audience questions, which we're going to do after that, but I'll stay on audio. Lead choice here was high performance in environments with high interference congestion. About 44% people chose that. The second choice, way behind is at 19%, and 19.7%, almost 20%, is superior support for large numbers of IoT devices in the home. Is this what you expected to see, Bill? Any surprises here?
I think, I'm actually kind of impressed by that. I mean, I think that those are probably the two best benefits, most important factors to particularly service providers, but people in general in their homes. I'm a little bit happy, that, certainly high throughput to single client devices is important. It's a marquee number. People do run that benchmark and so forth. But, the real thing that's happening in homes, as was pointed out earlier, is multiple streams at once and high congestion and interference. So I think those are actually great choices. People are thinking about this carefully.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for that, Bill, and thanks to the audience for participating in the poll. We're going to go next into a panel discussion, but we have so many good questions coming in from the audience that I think we're just going to go straight into the audience questions. And once again, I'm off video just because it's easier for me to read, but we have a ton of questions coming in. Let's see. Let's look at the latest questions. Okay. Since the availability of Wi-Fi 6 routers is limited, how are service providers prioritizing their deployment of Wi-Fi 6 routers right now? Who wants to do this, John or Bill?
Well, I'm happy to take a first stab at it. I think what we're seeing is that as we're upgrading into more technologically advanced gateways, for instance, like DOCSIS 3.1 on the cable side, we're seeing a more targeted approach from service providers for their higher bandwidth tier subscribers. For instance, deploying whole home Wi-Fi solutions to customers on a 200 megabit connection or higher for free, otherwise offering them on a rental basis. And so I think we'll see the same for Wi-Fi 6. Typically, historically, service providers, when they make a technology transition, they would like to keep one SKU on the engineer's truck and just if they have a VDSL gateway, they'll put it on an ADSL network, no problem. But I think we're seeing a much more targeted approach toward higher ARPU customers for the much more expensive technologically advanced gateways.
Okay, thanks, John. Bill, did you want to add anything to that?
I think there's a lot of ways to do it in which you actually make more money from it. That's the way you should do it. So, you can, some of the people we work with, they're offering it actually as a upsell. They can entice their customers, particularly when it comes with a whole service package with some additional software features and management elements. The other thing we see is that people are just making it as a thing that comes with their higher data rate services. So if you sign up for a higher, more expensive package, you get it. And then the other thing to think about is that it can save money by reducing churn. Churn's super expensive, and if you have people that you think are unhappy because of Wi-Fi behavior or performance, it may be very profitable in a certain sense to deploy the new gear to those people and prevent them from churning.
Okay, thank you both. We have a lot of questions here, but I just want to let you know that we put a form up on the screen, evaluation form. Please give us some feedback about the session. To complete the form, just press the Submit Answer button at the bottom of the page. And while you're doing that, I'll go back to questions, and we probably will go past the top of the hour, like 5 or 10 minutes, because we want to get to as many questions as we can. So here's a question for you, Bill, I think. Would OpenSync, I'm sorry, that's the wrong question. Does OpenSync support 8K use cases?
Yeah, OpenSync isn't limited in its bandwidth or its throughput at all. I assume by 8K, they're referring to 8K video type traffic flows.
I think so.
And
yeah.
OpenSync has, traffic prioritization and traffic reservation and so forth. So it's got all the QoE features in it. It can go on access points from small to large. If you're going to go for an 8x8 MIMO Wi-Fi 6 access point, it goes on that and makes full use of that. But it also, runs fine on smaller access points with weaker capabilities. So, I think it would be a very good choice and would make 8K run better than if you have an unmanaged system, for sure.
Okay. A lot of related questions about OpenSync here, Bill. So let's go with that. It's, which major vendors support OpenSync right now?
Well, so it's supported on all the major chipset manufacturers. So if you get a reference design, let's say you get a reference design for an access point from Broadcom or Qualcomm, MediaTek, those reference designs are going to come with OpenSync already integrated into them. And then if we move the next step up in the supply chain, kind of in terms of OEMs, there was a big list there. I can hardly remember all the names, but there's a large number of different AP manufacturers who support it and will deliver an access point to you already preloaded with OpenSync on it, tested and certified and everything else. And then we had a list of service providers, which included quite a list of quite big ones, Charter, Comcast, Bell Canada, Liberty Global in Europe, et cetera, who also have deployed this and are supporting it as well. So it's really, if you kind of shop around for it, you're going to be able to find it. It's going to be able to be available to you.
Okay. One more OpenSync question. Does OpenSync offer a mechanism for security on the Wi-Fi 6 network, of the Wi-Fi 6 network?
Yeah, so OpenSync uses all the same Wi-Fi security mechanisms that are well known and in place, WPA3 and so forth. We just got done adding to it a one-touch onboarding system, so you can bring devices on the home, or actually zero-touch onboarding system, so you can bring devices onto the network in the home in a secure way with unique and independent passwords for each device in the home. Which allows you, for example, to turn off individual users if you have a guest who comes and you want to give them a temporary password and so forth. So it actually has some of the same types of access and security features that you'd see in an enterprise workplace supplied in the home, but in a much simpler way. You don't have to have a 802.1x radius server or something like that. It's kind of a simpler system, but still uses independent passwords.
Okay, thanks, Bill. John, I think this next question is for you. At least to start, what does the roadmap for Wi-Fi 6E look like? And are most providers waiting for 6E, or are they jumping in with Wi-Fi 6?
No, that's a good question. I don't believe, to answer the last question first, I don't believe that service providers are waiting for Wi-Fi 6E. 6E does present a great opportunity for sort of a super highway, if you will, of spectrum for Wi-Fi,
Right.
previously untapped part of the spectrum. But it's also facing some regulatory pause as it needs to be approved. Different countries throughout the world. I mean, the U.S. has approved it, of course, but other nations have not. And I think that when you look at a whole home system with Wi-Fi 6, it is more than enough to cover most broadband subscriptions currently. And so I think you'll see, many service providers going forward with Wi-Fi 6 and not waiting for 6E, despite the potential that is there.
Okay, thanks, John. Another question for you. Can you please share Wi-Fi's benefits in private network implementations in warehouse, shop floors, or smart factories?
Sure. So Wi-Fi can be a great aid for factories and other sort of private businesses. We're seeing a lot more applications, and I will highlight that this is slightly out of my typical coverage area, where I cover mostly home networking. But we are seeing like critical comms in factories starting to use more dedicated Wi-Fi solutions, so that device A can speak to device B, machine A can speak to machine B using dedicated Wi-Fi. And it's especially true if this factory is somewhat isolated, or they can shield it from any sort of outside interference. It become a very, very useful way for machines to communicate to each other. So.
Okay, thanks, John. Bill, back to you. How is Plume handling and looking at roaming and AP association in a home environment? Are you using a controller or some other mechanism?
Yeah, so we do manage, we call it client steering. So we do manage where the clients connect in the home. And it is true that, when you look at these topologies, it's not necessarily the closest access point that's going to give the device the best performance. You can imagine that a variety of arrangements, maybe not all the access points have the same capability. Maybe it's actually a shorter and quicker direct shot to get to the gateway in the home rather than going through multiple hops through a bunch of access points. And so we actually do we're constantly observing that. And we will kind of push and shove these client devices around if they have chosen a not very good place to connect.
Okay, thanks, Bill. How do OpenSync and Plume platforms compare to other service provider management options like Broadband Forum TR369?
I can comment on that. So TR369 is a set of protocols for communicating with devices in the home. And so it overlaps a portion of what is in OpenSync and kind of how that is. I think the main difference is actually in adoption and availability. So as far as I know, there really aren't any open source implementations of TR369 that you can get and put on an access point today. I actually don't think that there's any cloud services that are really using the full TR369 implementation at this time, whereas OpenSync has multiple cloud vendors and this open source community behind it. OpenSync also was adopted by the Telecom Infrastructure Project, or TIP. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's another major industry organization that did adopt it as the basis of what they're calling TIP Open Wi-Fi. And so it has a very strong industry organization behind it that's driving it forward as well.
Okay, one last question for you, Bill, and then we'll unfortunately have to wrap up. Let me see if I can get it out here. When managing a cluster of devices, collected customer premise across points, say in large apartment buildings, how often do you have to access those devices to alter their bands and power? Are current generations of the AP capable of such real-life configuration changing behavior performance-wise? That's a mouthful.
So our system, we do We do what we call a scheduled optimization. So every night, we do it in the middle of the night, like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. We optimize every single network that we manage. So we have about 25 million networks that we're managing right now. So every single network gets looked at individually and optimized each and every night. We do it in the middle of the night because if you do decide that you want to reconfigure the network, it's less disruptive, obviously, to typical people's usage to do it at like 3 in the morning. And then in addition to that, we do watch during the entire day for conditions to change significantly. If there's suddenly a major increase in interference on a particular frequency channel, for example, we may move a network dynamically on the fly from one frequency channel to another in order to get out of the way of that interference. And yes, the access points are, we can control them, we can change their frequencies and so forth. When we deploy a new topology in a home, we kind of do it in a step-by-step way. I kind of describe it as rock climbing. You know, when you're rock climbing, you kind of like move one hand at a time and everything else is still gripping on. And so we kind of move these from one topology to another, you know, kind of while maintaining the network connectivity.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Well, we've received a record number of questions, but unfortunately we've run out of time. But I want to let everybody know that we'll be sending the questions around to Bill and John, so they'll be able to respond to you by email and text later on. But right now, I want to thank you all out there for attending, and special thanks to our two main speakers, John Kendall of Omdia and Bill McFarland of Plume, for doing most of the heavy lifting today. Let's give them a big hand out there. This webinar will be archived on the Light Reading website for the next year, starting early next week, later this week, early next. Within the next 24 to 48 hours, you should receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. So please review the webinar whenever you'd like over the next 12 months. This webinar is copyright 2021 by Light Reading. The presentation materials are owned or copyrighted by Light Reading, Plume, and Omdia. These three companies and their speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of all of us here, thanks for joining us today. Be well, stay safe, and take care, everybody. We'll be back at you again soon.